Hello, today is June 21st, 2019. I'm meeting today with Mr. Paul Corrington at his home in Firestone, Colorado. My name is Brad Hoops. I'm the interviewer for the Northern Colorado Veterans History Project. Welcome, Paul, and thanks for sitting down today to tell your story.
Well, thank you, Brad. Happy that you're here.
Very good. Let's start out, if we could. Tell us a little bit about yourself, your date of birth, where you were born, a little bit about your family.
Okay, I was, I was born in New Berlin, Illinois, which is about 20 miles west of Springfield, capital of Illinois. And I was, back then, my grandfather was an editor of the local newspaper in New Berlin. And back then, you were usually with family. And I was born in my grandfather's home in New Berlin, Illinois. And July 20, 1925.
Wow. And now, what'd your father do for a living?
Well, my father was he had several things, different jobs through his lifetime. But as I remember him, like when I was 6 years old or so, mainly he worked for the Singer Sewing Machine Company, and at that time, sewing machines was a big part of life for all families. When they made most of their clothes and stuff even. And he was, I remember him being a security agent for Singer, and he kind of was an undercover operator and went from different stores to around Illinois that had maybe possible security issues, and so I guess in my youngest years, although I don't really remember them, but I guess we lived in several towns for 6 months maybe or a year throughout Illinois as he did his job. And when he was completed in one city, he went to another city. So that's kind of how I grew up my first few years.
Yeah,
then after that time, we settled in Decatur, Illinois. And back at that time, when I was like 5, 6 years old, I grew up in the Depression.
That's always a question I like to ask your generation. How it affected you and your family.
So in 25, when I was 5, that'd be 1930. In 29 to 32, we grew up in the Depression. So I just remember places, rented homes where we lived in Decatur. And some of the things that I remember prior to going to school was, back then they had soup kitchens, what they called. And I remember a couple of times there was a grocery store that worked as a kind of a food center where they had soup and stuff. I remember you going with a big metal pail, and getting soup and bread and some other stuff, and walk over there and walk back home, and so forth. And of course, back then, the homes, you didn't have no refrigerators. It was all ice boxes, and the ice guy would come around, a couple times a day and holler an ice, and get 25 pounds put in the top of the ice box. That was your refrigeration. And of course, back then, very few homes had, even at that time, some of them didn't have restrooms in their homes. You had the little box out in the back 30 feet out, which was pretty tough in the winter. It was 10 below zero snow. But and you had the big old round oak stove sitting in the living room, where it keep you warm and so forth. So that's kind of the early things, and that I remember prior to going to school and so forth.
Now, did you go through the school system there in Decatur?
Yeah, I went to a school. The first school I went to was called Garfield School in Decatur, and it was about probably 4 or 5 blocks from where we lived, which of course everybody walked in. Very few people had cars, if so, wasn't much, and you walked to school. So I went to school for 6 years at the Garfield School there, and then after the next 3 years, I went to Roosevelt Junior High School, and those years, I was 31, so I was 6. I was 37 when I went into, it was 1937 when I went into junior high school at Roosevelt High School. And so 37, 38, 39, 40. Then I spent 41, the 42, 43 period, which would have been Decatur High School. At that time, things was tough. I remember when I was started at junior high school, and things was tough at that time, and so I remember my dad opened a furniture store in the 700 block of North Water Street, which means it was 700 blocks north of downtown, and he had a storefront, and I remember that we had a great big curtain over about the back 30 feet, and the furniture store was in the front, and we lived in the back with our family.
Wow. Now, I forgot to ask, any brothers and sisters?
Yeah, I had my sister was the oldest, and I was second, and then I had another 2 brothers.
Okay.
So I had 3 brothers and 1 sister.
Okay.
So my sister was always my kind of guardian, being 8 years older than me, and then I was next, and then so I remember living back there and in the downtown area, and things was tough and going to school. I tell the kids, I always remembered, golly, what can I do when you're out of school? How can I make some money to live? And so anyway, one of my friends told me what he did and making some money. And so what we did was we went to downtown, which had apartment buildings, There was only 7 blocks on down to the center core of the town. And you go up into the apartments, knock on the door, and tell them who you are. I'm trying to, make some money, and I'm going to collect newspapers in the building. And would you be kind enough if I stopped twice a week and collected your newspapers? Or would you keep them for me? So I had a little red wagon and a little rope. So twice a week I would go down to the apartment building, collect the newspapers, load them up on the wagon, tie them up. And of course, right down from where my dad's store was on a few blocks down with the local, what they call junkyards and so forth, salvage yards and stuff. And so they placed down a few blocks down there where you sell the papers, so you could go down there and spend a day to doing that, but you could make 50 or 75 cents. So, I guess I might have been an early entrepreneur, I don't know.
Yeah, right, yeah.
But those are some of the things that I remember.
Wow.
Going. And then I remember for everybody, that young guys, if they wanted to work, everybody lied about their age.
Yeah.
And so I think I was 15 when I lied about my age, and I went to work for the Wabash Railroad in the summer out of school, unloading freight cars.
Real, geez.
And so forth. And then later on, I went to work in the local downtown theater as an usher, and of course, again, you lie about your age to get there and so forth. And it was theater there was what they called a public great states theater, which was owned by Ballum and the Cats out of Chicago, where the Chicago Theater, the main office and stuff. And they had about 50 theaters in Illinois, so we had about 1,000-seat theater there in town. We had 5 or 6 theaters in town. Back in those days, movies was the only kind of entertainment anybody had,
Right.
So I worked there from 15 on up, and at that point, after several years working there, that's where I met my wife. She had the concession stand there.
Oh, wow.
And so that's where I met my wife. And actually, and then 8 days before I was 18, we got married.
Oh, wow.
And 8 days later, I went up and registered for service in World War II, and kind of more or less off I went.
Oh, boy. Let me back up. Do you remember where you were and what you were thinking when you heard about Pearl Harbor?
I remember exactly where I was. I was an usher then at the time, and this theater I worked in had a center section and two side sections with aisles down and a balcony. And you were assigned where you was going to work that day, that Sunday, and they assigned me to the balcony. And so I remember it well. People coming in, and back then it was strictly radio.
Yeah, right.
And did you hear what happened? You know, the Japs bombed Pearl Harbor and so forth. You know, you don't even know what they're talking about.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
And so that's where I was at. I was working as an usher then at the balcony in the theater there. And then, of course, a few years later, the newspaper printing office was only about 3 or 4 blocks around the corner, downtown, where they printed the newspaper and stuff. So they was getting papers out within, 2 or 3 hours, extras, and back then the papers, kids had papers, and they used to, on the street downtown, extra, and so forth. So that's kind of how you really learned about that stuff.
Wow. Well, do you remember thinking, I mean, you were just a 16-year-old, do you remember thinking, boy, am I going to get drawn into this thing? I mean, did that even enter your mind, or what?
No, I don't think so.
Yeah.
I think, you knew it was above and beyond you by a few years. And I guess you just was wondering, really, I think most people didn't even hardly know where the hell you been.
Yeah, right, yeah, exactly, yeah.
And then so forth,
So we fast forward 2 years, you're 18 now, and you went down and registered?
Well, let me tell you, just back up one step. While I was working at the theater, and then my wife-to-be, we'd go out and, dated and so forth and such. And at that point, the theater had started being remodeled by a fellow named Chris Bendsen, and he operated a company out of Quad Cities called C. Bendsen Company, and he specialized in remodeling motion picture theaters. And so it just so happened that he had the contract to remodel this theater prior to the war and so forth. So I met Chris there, and through the times, and Chris was from Quad Cities, and he was there remodeling the theater, and we hit it off pretty good, and so forth. And so anyway, after I got married, we decided I was going into service and so forth. So wife and I decided to get married. So we got married 8 days before I signed and registered for World War II. So during that period, Chris that remodeled our theater there, if you didn't have a business that was war related, you could not buy materials and so forth, and you had to fundamentally cease operations. So he went down the street a few blocks, and he bought a little old theater with about 350 seats, which was primarily one of the cowboy shows where they just showed the old cowboy movies, Tom Mix and Hoot Gibson and all them old guys prior to the modern cowboys. Yeah. And so he remodeled that theater, grounds enough stuff to put in used seats, trying to remodel it. The name of the theater prior to his purchase was the Morrow's Theater in the 300 block of North Water Street in Decatur. And so he changed the name to the Bond Theater. And shortly after I got married, knowing what was coming up, he asked me if I would go to work and run that theater down there as a daytime manager. So that's how I got to know Chris Bendsen, which was my entire life for the 52 years after I got out of service.
Oh, wow, we'll get into that. Yeah, we will, yeah.
So anyway, I worked down there for about 3 or 4 or 5 months prior to going into service. And so on my 18th birthday then, I registered. Then shortly thereafter, they sent us to the what they call it, there's a word for it, where you registered to go into service. So what that was back then there was no all big airplanes and everything taken over. It was all train. So I had a train called the Wabash service. Wabash. It went from Chicago, went all through Illinois into Missouri, and over to Kansas City and back every day. So everybody picked up recruits going in to the service centers, and so you got a notice, and I got a paper that the Secretary of Service sends you a notice to be at the railroad station at 3 o'clock in the morning, and blah blah blah. So anyway, I was one of the draftees that would been picked up on that line all the way. So we went to Dearborn Station in Chicago, and I would guess there was like maybe 150 or 200 of us on that train going into the induction center, is what they called back then. And so when we got on that train that morning, and as directed by the service board, selective service board, got in Chicago about 8, 9 o'clock in the morning, and so forth. We was met at Dearborn Station by about a half a dozen MPs. So they told us, give us instructions of what was what, so forth, and they said, we're going to the induction center. And the induction center was a great big hotel right downtown Chicago. I can't remember, but they took over the entire ballroom. Must have been about a block square. It was that big a hotel. And anyway, that was the official induction center. So they said, you guys stay in line, blah, blah, blah. And so we're going to walk. So we walked about 8 blocks or something down to the induction center. So went in there, and it was a big ballroom and so forth. So the first thing they did was give us a little medical look over. We already had a medical thing before, to even get to that point. So if you didn't have any issues that they was concerned about, then they said different table setting. 1, 2, 3, 4 was Army, Navy, Marine Corps, Air Corps, and so forth. And so they did first they had doctors give you all kinds of reviews, psychological and everything else. What was your past, blah blah. So anyway, got to this one place here and talking to them and so forth. And so the first one was the Army Air Corps, and I got to talk to the guy, and he says, well, we're going to put you in the Air Corps. He says, you're going to be a bombardier. And I said, okay, and what? I don't know about that. He says, well, we'll teach you. Okay, whatever you say. So anyway.
Had you ever even been up in an airplane before that?
No, I didn't even know what a bombardier was.
Yeah, right.
Anyway, so after that, you spend about 30 minutes at each table. And he said, so back down the line, and when I got to the Navy, and so the Navy said, went through all that, and he says, well, we just got a call in today, and he said, we're going to put you in the Navy, and you're going to be going into be a Navy hospital corpsman. And I said, I'm not a Navy hospital corpsman, I don't know about that. Well, we're going to teach you. So anyway, after that, you do all that and get through there, then they sent us home for a week or 10 days. And then again, back on the train, back to Chicago at Dearborn Station. And then we go to boot camp, and I went through boot camp. Sometimes I lose my memory train of thought.
That's okay.
But I'll pick it up in a minute.
Okay.
But Farragut, Idaho.
Oh, okay, so you didn't go with...
That was the boot camp at Farragut, Idaho. And so we've had boot camp there, went home, then back.
Well, how was that, going from civilian life into military life? Was that much of an adjustment for you?
Well, I think, at least in my part, I just assumed and knew I had no control over anything, what was going to happen. And I knew all I was going to do was do what I was told to do and not be argued about it and just get her done. So that's kind of was my attitude. So anyway, then we finished boot camp at Farragut. Idaho, and then they give you a short leave back home. And at that point, it was the end of 1943, and I was shipped back to Farragut from my leave, and then they put me on another train. Just the last weekend of '43, between Christmas and New Year's, there they put me on another train from Farragut. I went on up the coast, and then I wound up in San Diego. I think probably about 27th, 8th, right after Christmas. I wound up in San Diego at the Naval Hospital in Balboa Park, and at High Def. And at that time, why, that was the largest and best naval hospital in the world.
Now, did your wife follow you out, or did she stay back home?
She was not until later.
Oh, okay.
And so then, not knowing anything, they sent us into quarters, and I couldn't believe it. There's the Naval Hospital base. We had terrazzo floors, little kind of little private areas, and had nice beds and everything, showers. It was first class. I mean, then you thought you was in a hotel. And so anyway, that was where I was stationed first there. So then after the Christmas holidays and New Year's, then I started Hospital Corps School, which is a 3 months training school, and I had all my hospital training books and everything that I did back at that point. And so after we got through that, it was a 3 month deal, and then they said they needed OR techs. And so you don't ask anybody anything or anything. They just tell you what's what, and you do it.
Well, how did those 3 months go for you? I mean, you had no previous medical teachings or anything. Did you pick it up? How was that 3 months for you?
Well, again, it's just a book and training.
Yeah.
I think we had 6 or 8 different classes with a different subject, just like going to school.
Yeah, right.
We went to school each day and had, an hour here, an hour about this, that, and the other. As I said, I have my book and everything that I trained for, and so forth. So you get graded and so forth, and you graduate from Hospital Corps School, which was a 3 month fast track deal. And then at that point they, like I say, they said they had need for OR techs. So then I stayed at the same hospital, but just changed courses and stuff, and went for 6 months and trained as an operating room technician.
Well, see, sorry to interrupt, but we can go back to the conversation we had before we got off, before we turned on the camera, when you said it was the roll of the dice. Navy corpsmen were often went with the Marines inland. You very easily could have been one of those guys.
Well, see, at that point, the Marines didn't have any medical service, so the Navy furnished corpsmen, and there were different types of corpsmen and different fields. Some of them were field corpsmen. If the Marines went in, why they went in with them and so forth, but there was corpsmen on ships, there was corpsmen, and doing hospitals, many types of different job placements and so forth. So mine, and again, as I say, you have no control over what you're going to do or where you're going. So after I got through with OR tech stuff, why then I was sent to a naval hospital in Shoemaker, California, and my duty was, and I don't know why nobody gave me an explanation, it was always duty and further transfer. I wasn't like you with the same guys for 3 years, and you're buddy and back up, you didn't have that. Okay. And so I went to Shoemaker for a while, and then while I was there, I took 2 ratings, increased my ratings to pharmacist mate second class and passed tests for that. And then, again, not knowing nothing, they sent me to some place in San Francisco around that general area, hospitals and stuff, and everywhere you went for some kind of training, a specialist in this or something, try to get you beefed up into what's what. And so then after that, they sent me down to a small craft training center in that's South San Diego, and I was then assigned to a troop transport ship. It was APA 67 USS Burleson, and what that was, it was a brand new ship. I just was christened. We was the first crew aboard this ship, and for people that don't know, if you're a first crew aboard the ship, they call you a plank owner.
That's right. Yeah.
You know about that. So anyway, and there were 3 or 4 different APAs, which were really troop transport ships. And again, we were in a convoy going somewhere, and everybody had a lot of speculation, but nobody knew where we were going.
And how was that trip for you? I mean, here's a boy from landlocked Illinois going to sea. Did you get your sea legs, or how was that going to sea for you?
Well, there was a lot of guys that, down in the lower decks and stuff, there wasn't much ventilation back in those days, so a lot of guys had to stay up on deck for the first few days because they had an issue with being sick. But I handled it pretty good. I think I was only sick just a little bit one time, so I didn't have too much trouble with that. So anyway, and on that ship, of course, I was put into as a corpsman, and then I was in the hospital area of the ship, so it was a little bit better from a standpoint of getting a little fresh air. But anyway, so we boarded that ship, not knowing anything about where we were going or anything.
And sorry to keep interrupting, but how was that for you? I mean, thinking about that, here's a 18, 19-year-old. You're uncertain where you're going. You just left a wife back home. What's going through a kid's mind during that time?
Just being 18, it's all new, and you don't have any big feelings about it. And again, I think I was the kind of guy that, hey, I know they're going to tell me what to do and how to do it, so that's what I'm going to do. Let's get with it. So I kind of think I had that attitude most of the time, so it didn't really bother me much.
But how about with your wife? I mean, you left your wife back with the uncertainty you may not see her again.
Well,
I mean, did that even bother you or play into that?
I never even thought about that. Really. And so we got out with this transport convoy, not knowing where or anything. And anyway, we got out a couple of days, and the prop started falling off our ship. We had to go back, and we spent about 2 or 3 days back trying to get the prop fastened back on, and couldn't believe how that ship just shook. Like Riley said, the prop was loose and was falling off. So anyway, went back, got that fixed, and then we hurried up, and they slowed the convoy down. We tried to join them, but we never did ever catch them. And of course, they was worried because, still had Jap submarines in the area, and they wanted to keep the convoy going. So not knowing, then that first stop was, we wound up in Tulagi. And so nobody knew where Tulagi was, but of course it was around there. Then we went from Tulagi, stayed there a few days and did some unload, load, mop up stuff and so forth. Then we went to Guadalcanal. And of course, Guadalcanal was one of the first main places where they had their first. Right. But they had it under control. But they still have all kinds of Japanese that up in the mountains and stuff, and every now and then they'd come down and try to shoot you on the road and so forth and such. So, anyways, I remember about that trip in Java, 2 things. One was when we got to Guadalcanal, and I just went in with a doctor or 2 and 3 or 4 corpsmen. That's just how we went in off board ship. And I always remember the old chief there in Guadalcanal. He had 12 wives, and so we had peroxide. And the old chief, he knew the medical people coming in before us, they give them a peroxide. And he put that on their hair, and their hair would turn orange. And then the chief said, he'd give you a wife if you get a bottle of peroxide. He'd give you one of these 12 wives for a bottle of peroxide. I'll never forget that. And the other thing I remember, after we was there a few days, as I say, they still had a certain segment of Japanese fighters who was up in the mountains and on up, and there was some roads that ran around the water and so forth, and they would come down and shoot at them, you know, occasionally and so forth. So I remember while we was there, they took a few corpsmen, doctors, and dove for different ships because they didn't have adequate medical to do this maneuver to try to get rid of some of them guys. So when they come down, boy, they had a mop-up operation. They went up and so forth and tried to get rid of some of them. So I always remember that. We was in the back kind of following up in case they had wounded and so forth. And when they told us when we left, he said, now, whatever you do, if you hear somebody while you're walking along that road and so forth, holler, corpsman, don't answer the call. He said, some of the Japanese would be up in the trees hollering corpsman and get you to go there, and then they'd kill the corpsman. They had an old saying, if they killed a corpsman, they killed 25 Marines. That was an old saying. So those was the two things I remember that. Then we get back on board ship. And of course, then we picked up troops and so forth. And at that point, they was going in, we had to wait till they got done in Iwo Jima. And when they was going into Iwo Jima, you know, they was going in there, and that was going to get that island secured. Everything was island hopping for Air Force, Air Force area. So anyway, that thing went on for about 6-7 weeks, and then now the war, part of the war was over in Europe.
Yeah. They
had brought all those fresh soldiers from Europe on ships out there around the island of Ulithi. They had hundreds of ships, thousands of men.
That must have been a spectacular sight.
Because he was going to invade Japan.
Yeah, right.
So anyway, we were sitting there, and we had, at that point then, we had about 900 troops aboard. And so we were sitting out there on Ulithi with thousands of other ships just doing this, waiting to get out of Iwo Jima, because we couldn't get in. We was going to Okinawa, an invasion of Okinawa. So after they got that thing done, end of, I guess what was it, end of February, I think. So we were supposed to go in. So April the 1st, 1945, we made the invasion of Okinawa. And so it was invaded by many different angles, and with different invasion to here and here and here, taking that and this, that, and the other, you know. And so, of course, I was on board ship as a war tech there, and with our troops, and we went in on the kamikazes. We went again and finally got anchored, and there wasn't much activity, but we had kamikazes at first. As it was there, they was trying to dive on. We was anchored, so they was trying to drop bombs and everything on us and so forth. So I remember, you know, we'd shoot some of them planes down, or enough that they would have to hit the water. You'd have a bunch of metal debris falling on the deck and stuff. And I remember one time on one plane, you could literally see the pilot with his helmet on and stuff. He was that close landing in the water, you know, out there, you know, it was, man, it was kind of exciting. And so what they did, we had some security people on board, and so what they wanted to do was pick up the Japanese that, you know, that didn't, you know, wasn't killed in a lot of them was just shot down. They just got in the water.
Oh, really? Oh, okay.
So they picked up on our ship. They had 2 or 3 of them. They had them in security, and so forth. So that's kind of how that went. And then as we landed our troops, it was about 3 or 4 days there before we got our troops landed. And so we landed our troops in. And there wasn't much activity until they got on in there. And so I remember then that we got our troops off and so forth. And I remember going there. They called several of the ships, took corpsmen off of several of the ships after we'd got our troops on in. And so there wasn't much activity right at the shore, but as they got in, so they took the people, the guys that was wounded on up in, there was a Naha River that ran the capital on out in, the ocean there, and so they brought them back close to the where we was anchored there. So they put them along on the shore there, and we had LCVPs. So we went in and picked them up. I think, as I remember, we could take 12. We had 12 stretchers on, and then we took them out to a hospital ship that was anchored out. They had one hospital ship anchored, and take them out there because back then, no airplanes.
Yeah, right.
And then doing it, if you went back to the state wounded, you went back on the ship. The next ship that could take you and had the medical help to take care of what you had wrong with you and so forth. So that's kind of how that went. So then it seemed like over there, they seemed to have a typhoon about every month over there.
Right.
And so after about the first week we was there, we got our stuff in. So the word came about, big typhoon coming in. So that anybody that had done their job, such as provisions and stuff, unloaded troops, whatever, get out of there. So we had to get out of there, man. We got out of there just barely. So we had quite a few days of that old ship coming clear up out of the water, the old screws running around, the old ship a shaking and so forth. And so we went, at that point with that ship, we went back, as I remember, we went back to Guam, and then we went on to Pearl Harbor. And then at that point, we did maneuvers and stuff for a while around Pearl Harbor, and then they transferred me to a submarine tender at that point. So I went on the USS Fulton, the AS-11, which was a submarine tender, which we had 13 submarines. And so what they did with submarine tenders from the start of the war, even from midway on out, they would take the tenders and jump island to island to get as far out as they could, and then anchor, and then the submarines would go on out and do what they could do. So it was kind of island hopping, much like you was getting the airfields. We kept moving westward. So when I got aboard there, then we went to Guam, and that was the last forward area out there. And so we, as I say, we had 13 submarines, so we'd have about half of them out doing stuff. Nobody probably knows exactly what a submarine tender does, but they got everything on a submarine tender, from torpedoes to ice cream cones. I mean, they can fix anything. They got every kind of a craft aboard that ship. They can repair, fix, and do anything. They had ammunition and everything. And so when a sub that was out, they just come in and anchor with us, and then they come aboard. And if they're like at Guam, they have a rest area to get them over in the rest area, then they send a crew aboard that submarine and clean it up, refit it, fix anything, whatever, ammunition or whatever, and get it ready to go out again. So it was just a matter of 6 in, 6 out, kind of like that.
Gotcha.
So that's how that operated.
And you still operated in the medical capacity?
Yeah, at that point, I was in the medical, and I was an OR tech, and so anybody that had any kind of surgery or anything, and I was the only OR tech, so I had the entire operating room, and I met with the doctors and assisted them in surgery or anything, whatever it was. I can't remember, but we had probably about 6, 7 doctors, dentists, surgeons, and so forth on board. Ship there. So that's kind of then same with them, with the guys on the submarine coming in. If they needed medical help and stuff, well, then they was able to get that handled. So that's kind of how that works. So I was there in Guam doing that after we got out of Okinawa, and so I was there when they dropped the atomic bombs, and it's the 6th, and kind of funny. We was anchored there, and on board ship, the captain very seldom ever comes on the intercom. So the OD on board ship made stand down, everybody stand down, and the captain has a very important message for you and so forth. So finally the captain come on, and give a little speech about President Truman, about a new weapon and so forth and such, and they talked about it. And so they said they just had dropped atomic bomb on Nagasaki on the 6th. And everybody looked at one another and, what the hell's an atomic bomb? Nobody knew.
Right.
So anyway, that was my first experience there. And then, of course, 3 days later, the second one. And fundamentally, practically everything just stopped.
Oh, wow.
With people, with ships and stuff that had communication, knew what was going on. We did lose a ship. I can't remember the name, but they didn't know about the bombs and so forth. Didn't have the communication, and we lost. I forget the name of the ship, but a big ship, and a lot of crew was lost during that little interim period there. But anyway, that's kind of what happened up to that point, and so kind of gives you a background there of what happened to me. Then right after that, as I say, everything pretty much come to a close, and of course, they kind of slowed down the war, and then our ship, we went in September. That was August, so about 5 or 6, we was sent to Seattle, Washington. We took about half our submarines, and they anchored Magnolia Harbor there, and they let you go home on leave for a few times. So that's kind of how I ended up in the war. And then after that got done, you were sent back to the ship. My ship went from different places while I was gone, and so I finally caught up with them. And then of course you got out of service by points. And so Berman don't know how long he's in, and combat and this, that, and the other. So I was sent to a separation center, and so then at that time again, no airplanes or nothing. You got to wait till you can get on a train, and I had to go back to Great Lakes Naval Training Station in Illinois, and so another train ride for 3 days back there, and get separated out of there and send you home. So that's kind of a rough synopsis of what happened to me war-wise.
Well, let me, if you don't mind now, I'd like to ask you a bunch of questions about that.
Okay, hang on just a minute.
Oh, you bet.
This got a little sinus once. Excuse me. Okay.
Yeah. Well, I always start out. Did you ever cross the equator?
Yeah, 2 or 3 times.
And go through that pollywog and shellback ceremony?
Yeah, I got my certificates and everything.
I heard that's quite a ceremony.
They do for your pollywog day, and you go through that line. Sometimes you get swatted pretty good.
Yeah, right. And so then you said you went right away to Guadalcanal. What was it like? I keep going back to this young boy from rural Illinois. Now you're halfway around the world in this exotic island with these natives that are coloring their hair. It must have been like flying to Mars. It must have been just a strange experience, or was it?
Well, every day was kind of a new thing. You never knew what was going to happen or anything, what you was going to do. You could be here, and a few minutes later, over the PA system, your name would come up, report to whatever, so you never knew what was going on.
Yeah. And talk about what life was like on the ship, as far as your sleeping quarters, the food, what you did when you weren't on duty, just a general day in the life of a sailor on.
Well, on the first ship, which was a troop transport there, we, of course, we had a lot of people on board there, that wasn't crew, and I was always in the sick bay area, in my area, so most of the time, they had food brought up to sick bay to take care of the patients and so forth, and the people, the corpsmen attending them. So we didn't mix too much in with the general population of the ship, doing things. We was always pretty much within our own little area of operations, doing what we had to do and so forth. So that wasn't too, we didn't have too bad a situation.
So life was fairly comfortable. You got enough to eat, got enough to sleep.
The only thing I remember when I first got on board that transport ship, and before we got in our quarters and stuff, we went to chow down that day, and we had a big open area there, and And they had tables, but they had little round things about 20 feet long sitting by the tables, and so they was torpedoes, and you sat on the torpedoes. It was kind of on a little track, you know. I remember just kind of sitting on some of the torpedoes and having chow. That was kind of interesting.
Wow. Wow. And what would you do when to kill time when you weren't on duty?
Well, of course, when you're on board ship, they're like that. You're
pretty much
on duty all the time, and you couldn't go no place. You know,
Yeah,
now they had movies on the back of the ship. You know, you could get out and at night and maybe watch a movie or something like that. And you could walk around. You could get time off. You could walk up on the bow and if you see and kind of watch the waves flying and everything in the sky. And it was quite a different, interesting thing.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
From your previous life.
Yeah, I'll bet. And what about being out to sea and kind of isolated? Where were you getting news about from what was going on in the world, how the war was going, or were you kind of isolated from information in that regard?
Well, you never do anything except what came over the PA.
Yeah.
So when you got on board the first ship, again, as I said, you didn't know where you was going. They just give you rundowns and so forth, and we never knew we was going to Okinawa,
Yeah.
So you really didn't know, but then when you kind of got there, or the day before, they kind of give you an update, and you kind of know a little bit what's going on.
Yeah. And did they ever play over the PA Tokyo Rose? Did you ever listen to her at all?
Well, it's so long ago. Yeah, I remember some of that, but not that much.
Okay. And what about in today's world, we've got computers and cell phones and such. Your only source of information from your wife and such was mail.
Well,
and being at sea, did the mail keep up with you, or how did that work?
Yeah, when I was in training, I was in training for 9 months. So after I got settled and so forth, and at San Diego, my uncle ran the newspaper in Chula Vista, which was just about 9 miles between there and Tijuana, toward the border there. And so he'd been out there several years and ran the Chula Vista Star newspaper. So I was fortunate enough that he could find a small apartment. So when I was in service, then my wife came out, and she lived there, and I was able to get back and forth. It was only like 9 miles from base for San Diego. So we had some time together during that period, and she worked there. Then she later worked in a let's see, what was that? That Rover aircraft, I think.
Oh, yeah. Roar.
She worked at Rover aircraft out there in San Diego for a while and so forth. Then when I went overseas, well, then she went back home and so forth. So kind of like that.
And then once you were out to sea in the Pacific, how was it as far as, you guys were constantly on the move. Did mail keep up with you? I mean,
yeah, they did a good job of evidently they must have, had a way to fly that mail and drop all that. As I understood, that's how they did it. And yeah, they did a pretty good job with mail, yeah.
And normally, how long would it take if you wrote your wife a letter and for it to get back and forth?
Yeah, just letters back and forth. And as I say, when Mom passed, I think all of our children, 6 of us, had down there in the basement like 45 boxes of stuff. So we come across all that stuff.
Oh, what a treasure. Yeah.
So that was kind of my life back at that point.
Yeah. And how about when they dropped the bomb and you guys were trying to figure that out, but then they said the war is over. There must have been a sense of relief that, I made it through this thing. And
yeah, well, at least, you felt comfortable, that, it looks like maybe they're going to get this matter resolved.
Oh, boy. Yeah, because you probably would have been in the thick of it had we ended up invading Japan.
Yeah, you never knew,
Yeah. So, Paul, let's move on to the post-war years. The war is over. You muster out of the service. Take your story from there. Where'd you go after you got out of the service? Then?
Okay, if I could back up just before I go.
Absolutely.
This is...
And we'll record all this with the pictures.
Okay.
Yeah, so we'll get this all on.
But a lot of people don't know, but this is, in the hospital corps back in my time, they used the Red Cross. as a corpsman. And so, but later on, in later years, after the war, they changed changed it to the caduceus, so they called them, I didn't call them hospital corpsmen, I think they're hospitals or something else, so they changed all that stuff. But anyway, that was my third class reading, but it was shown always with the Red Cross for the corpsmen. Okay, what did I do when I came back?
So you got out of the service and came back home. Take your story from there then.
Okay, after I come back and got to the Great Lakes and got out of the service there, I got out, I think it was January 22nd, if I remember correctly.
46?
46. And so I came home, and again, good old Wabash Railroad, Chicago, all through Illinois, so forth, down to Decatur, and I got home that evening. And
do you remember that homecoming?
Oh, yeah. And so anyway, about later, 8, 9 o'clock, and you remember I told you the fellow I was working for before I went in service. So Chris called me, welcomed me back home, and he said, when can you come back to work? And I said, well, anytime you want me to. He says, well, can you come back to work tomorrow?
Oh, jeez.
And I says, well, yeah, I don't have no clothes. All I got's my uniforms. And he says, well, Montgomery Ward is just 2 doors down from the theater where downtown in Decatur. And he says, go down, buy whatever clothes you want, and I'll pay for them. And he says, and you can start back to work.
Wow.
So anyway, then I went back to being the day manager of the theater. And after a while, there a couple of weeks and so forth, I didn't know it, but before I went in service, I hired a lady to be the box office girl or ticket seller. And anyway, while I was gone, Chris married her, and she was running the theater all the time I was gone. So after a couple of weeks, I said, Chris, I appreciate you want me to have my job back, but your wife's ran this theater for 2.5 years or so. And I said, you don't need 2 people doing this, so give me a couple of weeks and I'll find me something to do, and we'll part ways, and I thank you. So he said, no, I want you to go to work for my company. I'm going to start my company back again.
The renovation company?
Remodeling motion picture things and so forth. And I says, well, okay, what am I going to do? And he says, well, did you ever do any drafting in school? And I says, well, yeah, in high school you do drafting, the plan view, like draw like a tomato can and a round circle looking down on it. And elevation, you're looking at the side of it, and section through and so forth. And he said, good. He says, I'm going to let you handle our engineering department. I said, well, okay. One thing I guess that I don't know why, one of my crazy things, I guess, I didn't care what anybody said. If we was going to do something, okay, let's get her done. I guess that was just my crazy attitude. So anyway, I was the second employee of the company. And we started out the company, and back then motion pictures was floating in money all during the war. They had so much money, and all they wanted to do was get modern. And so he had a contract to build do the front on the theater, just build a new theater in Moberly, Missouri. And so anyway, that they was actually a new theater from the ground, so they was building it up at the general contractor. What we did back in that time, we put in porcelain storefronts and did box office, marquees, signage, and all that stuff. So we had the contract to do all that on that theater. Well, we never even we had no people. We only had one other guy and me, and we had about 6 blocks down the street the theater, with office theater was kind of our office for the company starting. And we'd walk back and forth, and we had about probably maybe a 1,200 old was an old shed more or less. Just there's walls around it and had light bulbs hanging up there. You pull chains on dirt floor and so forth. And we had made some big wooden benches and so forth to work on, and had hand tools. And so that's how we kind of got started doing things. And so anyway, for me, he said, I want you to do all the drafting and handling all the detail work and so forth. And I'd never done any of that before. So he had a set of prints for this theater. And it was like about probably 25 sheets. Back then it was blueprints, 24 by 36 inch blueprints for this theater. And he says, go over to the stationery store and buy some drawing paper, 24 by 36 inch sheets. He had a drafting table and stuff in the office area there, in a little room and so forth. And he says, unclip that, take every sheet out the front, and he says, lay it on the table, tape it down, put this blank sheet over it, and copy everything that's on that sheet, and so forth, so you understand what's going on. About a month and a half later, I had all the sheets copied and everything, and I had a pretty good idea what the hell was going on in that theater. So anyway, and back then, then I had to meet the architect, and because he wanted to talk to us about some of the stuff that I was going to do it and so forth. And so naturally I said, well, where's this guy at? He said, well, he's in Kansas City, Missouri. And I said, well, hell, I got the bicycle. How in the hell am I going to get to Kansas City, Missouri? It was in the cast iron building right downtown in Kansas City, Missouri. And his name, I'll never forget his name. His name was Ludwig Abt, A-B-T. He was an old German architect and I guess a fairly big firm at that time in Kansas City. So anyway, I didn't know nothing how I was going there. So he said, well, get on the train. And so you went to St. Louis, again that train, St. Louis, Kansas City. Got off the train, had my suitcase downtown. I didn't have no idea where I was at or where I was going. And back then they didn't have no hotels much or anything, you know. I was about to be up on the second floor commercial building below you, some stuff up. So I, somewhere close a few blocks away from that office, and so I got a hotel room up there, and they had the old fire hoses hanging on the wall and stuff, you know, and so forth. So next morning I went over and met Ludwig Abt and so forth, and we had a good meeting. And anyway, after I went through, and he says, you seem to know quite a bit about this, about what's going on here. And so I told him how I kind of got caught up with him on it. And he says, that's really great. Anyway, that's kind of how we got started. I had that meeting, got back on the train, went home. And so anyway, we put that thing together. And then in the meantime, between the start of that and actually doing the thing, you know, like 6 months went by or something. So then I went to school and let's see, I was Ohio, Davidson Porcelain Enamel Institute in Lima, Ohio. And what they did was, at that time, porcelain enamel was a big wall-facing construction material. It was highly used. Anyway, so I drove back and forth to Lima, Ohio, and went to school for about, probably, I can't remember, I think 3 months. So I learned how to engineer porcelain enamel and so forth and do that, so I could make all the drawings and all the panels. Every single panel had a certain size and so forth and went a certain place on the building. So you had to make drawings and do all of that. And then when they got the block building up, well, then I went there and measured the building and with a transit level line and, you know, up and down and get everything, so you get everything down to 1/16 of an inch. So that's kind of how we got started on that type of stuff. And one thing led to another. And so through the years, we worked for, there was a big theater chain, the one that I worked with, and as I told you earlier, the Public Rate Stage Theater was home office with the Chicago Theater up on the 5th floor. And so at that time I started going up there to Chicago about every 3-4 weeks and meet with the people to catch up, because that's where the construction was, on the 5th floor there. So I would meet with them to have to drive to Chicago, 3.5 hours, park down there in the loop, walk in there. You know, I always remember you know, what am I doing here? But that time I was 21 years old, you know, and 22, and what am I doing here? These guys, multi-millionaires, 50-some theaters in Illinois, Chicago theaters all over Chicago, and here I am going up there and all these vice presidents and so forth, you know, talking to them. Yeah. And I always said, okay, Lord, it's just me and you. You got to help me get this done. And so that's how I kind of went from there on through the times. But I always tried to be prepared, and I never left without my briefcase and totally prepared for everything, you know. And so it seemed like we got it done.
Yeah. And you said you were in the industry for 54 years? How long was your career?
Pardon me?
How long were in that career? 54 years, did you say? How long were you in that business then?
In that business?
Yeah.
Well, that was, I started in 46.
Yeah.
And in 1950, the name Chris Bendsen again, he, unknowns, didn't feel good last year or so. His back hurt, and I make those trips, and he wanted me to go with him, drive him with all over Illinois, Indiana, wherever we had to go. And so I went with him and drove and so forth, and did stuff that he would normally do. And he wound up with a cancer, and he died within 6 months of first feeling bad. That was in 1950, in August of 1950. So 46 to August of 50. Why he passed away. There we are. At that time, we had about 50-some people working for us, and we was doing work mainly in Illinois and Indiana at that time, because there was another theater chain in Indiana, about 50 theaters, and we did work for them like we did with Battleman Cats. And so, anyway, we had a real problem. We had a half a dozen jobs going on at the time around. And, you know, about 50 employees. You know, we had every trade. We was a union. Back then it was union, you know, we carpenters, laborers, like neon tube benders, electricians, sheet metal workers, glazers, so forth. So, you know, what do you do? So the estate hit them, you know, they didn't know what to do either. And his wife, she just had a little baby. And nobody knew what to do, and that kind of a specialized business that was hard to sell because they had to be built up, you know, yeah. And with people. So we had the people there, but what do you do? So they formed a corporation. Then, and at that point, I was general manager of the thing and in charge of production and installation and so forth, and in the engineering department. During that time, when I was doing all the work, I hired a graduate out of Middle University in drafting and so forth, engineering, and then we had a sketch artist we had hired. Back then, no computer stuff, right, everything done by hand, and then pattern makers. So we had 3 people in the drafting department that got things done. I kind of said, more or less, just handled that, made it match up with the rest of the stuff we was doing, manufacturing in the back. And so at that time, I guess I was just fortunate enough and had enough experience and had the right job classification that they needed me. Yeah. So they asked me to take a third of the new corporation. The state kept a third, and his brother. And interesting enough, Chris Bendsen came from Schleswig-Holstein, Germany, and just off the Baltic Sea. And he came to this country as a 17-year-old, and the reason he came here was because after World War I, Germany had reputations had to pay all the Allies so much money for all this war stuff. And so where did they get the money? They go and get it from all the people. You know, the people had farms and stuff. Well, back then, the farms they had, 10 or 12 kids, and that was their whole life and so forth. And so anyway, at that point, Chris came over to this country when he was 17. And he worked on a farm in the Quad City areas, and that's how he learned. Then he left there and he went to work for a sign company in Quad City area and learned this. They went to all the theaters and so forth, and then came to Decatur, and that's how I met him and so forth.
Yeah, right.
So point being, then so his family was from Germany. Well, during this period, he brought his brother over from Germany, and he was a trainer for the German Army for aircraft in World War II.
Wow.
And so anyway, he came to this country with his wife and two little children, and so he'd worked for the company for 3 or 4 years and went to university there to learn English, and a very accomplished guy and so forth. And so, and he'd worked at the company a couple of years before Chris died. So he took a third. So there we are, new guys. So that was 1950. So we went up to 58, and in the meantime, Ludolf was his name, his brother. I'll give him credit, he kind of wanted to get in the real estate business. To get in that train from Decatur to Chicago, he would get on that train in the morning early, like 5 in the morning or something, go to Chicago, and he went to real estate school there and got a realtor's license after, I went to 6 months doing that, come back, and actually got in the real estate business. And he wanted to, at that point in the late 50s, and I didn't know it, but he'd bought the third estate that they had, so he had 2/3 of the company. And he come to me in the latter part of 58, and he said, Paul, I want to go in my real estate business. He says, I want to get out of this sign business and so forth, and do you want to buy the company or not? I'm going to sell my part. And so I said, well, hell, I don't have the money, but back then you could go to the bank and walk in the bank and talk to the president of the bank. They knew who you was and so forth. So they loaned me $12,000 to get started, and so I took over the company in January of '59, and I went from '59 to 201.
Wow.
From 1959 to 201, I ran the company, and in 201, I sold the company, and I had to work another year for the new owner, so I worked to 202. So I went from 46 to 202 with the same company.
Wow.
And that company is still in existence and has grown and bigger and better than ever, and is still going back in Decatur.
And what's the name of that company?
Well, the company originally was named C. Bendsen Company, C.Bendsen Company, and so when Chris owned the company, it was just a LLC company. Then when we took it over, it was C. Bendsen Company Incorporated. Then when I took it over, I kept it as an LLC, and then when he bought the company, we used to kind of refer to it as Bendsen Signs and Graphics. So I was still in business closing out, so he couldn't take my name because I still had to go. And so he runs the company as Bendsen Signs and Graphics. So he bought the company. That's the name now, and it's still going today.
Wow.
So then after...
Was that a good career? Did you enjoy?
Oh, absolutely. We traveled. We did theaters for both the big chains plus a lot of independent people over 8 states around the Midwest. So it was very interesting. And then during that time, I realized that we got to have work. We don't have any university or school or anything to know and train our people and so forth and keep up with what's going on. So I got together with a couple of friends of mine, and I said, we got to, why don't we form a sign association? And so we get together. So anyway, long story short, I got together with a half a dozen guys, and we was able to form the Illinois Sign Association, and I was first president of the Illinois Sign Association. And at that time, I also prior to that, I was elected on the board of directors of the National Electric Sign Association. And I had 7 states that I represented and part of Canada. I think it was up around Quebec. But anyway, so after that, and it was the president of the National Association always had something they wanted to accomplish during their term. They wanted to accomplish state associations. which fell in line with, what I was already thinking about anyway. So the directors, that was their job to form, if they didn't have a state association, to do it. So that's kind of tied in, and we formed the Illinois Sign Association. And then I was the first president of that association. So that was a very interesting time.
Wow. And
because I always, you needed to talk to other people, your peers, and talk to them. What you doing? How's this work? And they would the same way back to you. What are you doing, and so forth. And we had a pretty good reputation at that time because there was very few people in the signage industry that did this theater renovation and so forth. So that was a very interesting time in my life.
Wow. Oh, fascinating.
So I did that for what was that, like 56 years, I think, or something. Then when I sold out the business, I had to work for another year for them. And so anyway, in the meantime, at that time, Mom fell down the dang stairway at home at a split level, and she hurt her leg. So my two girls that was out here, they come running home and so forth. And Dad, you got to get Mom out here so we can take care of her. So anyway, long story short, I rented a house down the street here, a new house that was being built. Made a 1-year lease on a house down there till I finished up my stuff, and Mom come out here, so that's how we got out here. And that was in, in 202, and then I had to stay back there, so I had a home in Decatur, and I had sold the business and had leased a building there. So I had to get all that stuff straightened out. So finally, then I came out here in 202, and when we was leased that house down the street here, and then we looked around, tried to buy something, and then we came onto this house. So we bought this house in 202 in July.
Wow.
So followed our kids. Finally got big story again, but when you got all the different interests, business interests, 1,000 miles away,
Yeah.
So during the last 2 years, you have to, everything you get into, you got to get out of.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So anyway, we had to sell a house back there, and then having to sell a building, and the business done, and so forth. So all those things, took time, and so through the years, and then Mom and I, before she passed away, we knew that we needed to get things straightened out for our children and so forth. And so with 6 wonderful, great children and so forth. And so anyway, we was able to get all that stuff done, and then it takes you, people talk about it, but it takes you years to get all that stuff done.
Sure.
So by the time you get out all that stuff and get through our living trusts and things like that, and try to to get things straightened out for your children and so forth.
You bet.
So that's kind of a little rundown on my life.
So let's talk a little bit about family. 6 children, and how many grandchildren, great-grandchildren?
Well, I'll tell you, Mom took care of all them numbers, but I do know it. We had 18 grandchildren.
Wow.
And then I think, I don't know, hey Tony, help me. How many grandchildren we got?
Sherry and I were just talking. Come on. I don't know. We had 30.
We had
A lot of
we
great.
had 18 grandchildren, and I think great grandchildren, and we got some great.
Yeah, great greats. I think five great greats. We're counting.
Wow.
I think 5 or 6 great greats.
Yeah. So
We'd have to list them actually.
Yeah,
because
right.
we had tracked one time, and then people kept getting married, the grandkids kept getting married and having kids.
Yeah.
And
so then with that, then Mom had health issues even before we come out here. I told you about her falling away, but she had health issues that kind of a stomach-related issue, which sometimes hangs on here for many, many years. So she went through about 20 years of health issues, and so in now she finally decided that she just didn't want to. She was in the hospital getting transfusions and stuff. And toward the latter part of her life, she was in the hospital every week or two, getting transfusions and sitting in there. She finally just got us all together and said, "Hey, I just don't want to do this anymore. I'm just ready to give it up." And so she went in hospice care here at home, and Tony worked at the bridge for a number of years, and so the girls got together and said, "We want to take care of Mom in hospice at home and handle it." So that's how we did it, and so Mom had a good life. She was able to live here with her life and not be in a hospital or something, and had all her family with her practically every day. Tony was here taking care of her, doing all the meals and cooking and taking care of everything. And so she passed on December the 10th of 17. And
74 and a half years marriage?
74 years and 5 months when she passed, so a few days.
Wow.
And that's her. And now where's the picture of Mom? That in there?
We'll definitely get that on the video. Yeah.
But anyway, the picture that I got of her, I carried that picture all the time. I was in the South Pacific with me. All that time, still had it. So she passed here, and her service was on December the 20th of 17, and she's at Fort Logan National Cemetery. She had a wonderful service there, and that's where I'm going. And I carried that picture with me all.
We're going to get that on the tape here in a
all
bit.
the time while I was in service.
Wow.
So anyway, and then of course now my situation kind of went from I had all kinds of little medical issues that could be my end, but diabetes and everything, but all that stuff is perfect, nothing wrong with me. And then I wind up with bone marrow cancer.
Oh, boy.
So that's kind of what's I'm kind of fighting that kind of a deal. So knowing my time frame and what I got left, that's why I tried to get all my stuff in order and so forth. So that's kind of how I'm going. That's where I've been. That's what I did, and that's just how I'm going out.
Very good. Well, Paul, as we wind down this interview, is there anything I didn't ask you that you wanted to talk about? Any stories that have floated to the top that you want to talk about? And I open that up to you guys as well, so that ideally we round out your story as best we can, or do you think we got everything that you wanted to talk about?
Well, I think the only other thing was that, as I told you, with 6 kids, our oldest son's in Florida, and our son David, he's in Bloomington Normal in Illinois, and then the rest of the children at this point are out here. So we've got 4 of them out here and still 2 of them out of state. But I think the biggest thing that I see in our life, and one thing I will say in Venice, when we first started, we had kids after the war, had 2 or 3 kids real quick after the war, and Mom tried to come out and help at the office and run things and so forth. And as much as I loved her, and I'm sure she loved me, we didn't agree on a lot of stuff. And so by that time we had the kids and so forth, and it was a chore for her to try to run the family and work at the office and this, that, and the other. So I told her, I said, "Bess, this isn't going to work." I tell her to do something, and I'm very, what's the word? It's got to, if I want to do something, it's got to be perfect, and I want it done this way, and nothing in between. Perfection. And so anyway, we kind of had a little disagreement about, I'd look in the file, and where I had the file, that's where it should be, and wasn't there, was where she wanted to be.
Oh, okay.
So anyway, my point is, she was wanting to be so helpful and everything. I said, "Bess, we got kids, you got a big job to do. I got a job to do. I got to run this company the way I want to run it. I think you got to run the house and the kids the way you want to run it." So I said, "Why don't you just run the home?" I give her a paycheck every month. Didn't ask her what she did with it or anything. And she had a home and had a car. She took care of the kids all through school and did everything and did a great job with all the kids and so forth. So she ran the house perfectly. took care of all great kids, 6 great kids, and did a wonderful job. And I just did the company, so that's kind of what I remember.
Yeah, very good. Well, the last question I like to ask in these interviews, as you look back on your time in the service, in the Navy, and everything you experienced, did that play a role in your life, change your life, affect your life at all, or was it just simply a chapter in your life? How would you answer that?
Well, I think I've never been a very opinionated person. In other words, I'll do my own thing, and I have my own way of doing it, and I won't quit till I get it done, and so forth. And I thought really everybody else, that's their life, and they got to run their life, do what they want to, how they want to. So I think I've carried that through my whole life of just really doing my own thing and so forth, and not get too opinionated and wanting to be involved in a bunch of stuff I don't know nothing about. And even today, and with all this crazy world we live in and the TV and everything, why you can, a lot of people are opinionated by politics and activities and stuff. And I do watch TV every day, just know what's going on. It comes in here, goes in here, goes out the other side. I don't want to tell you anything about it. I don't have no opinions. So, the world's got to go on and so forth. So I just kind of operate that way. I don't get too upset or opinionated about anything. So I think that helped me at least to not get too involved in anything.
Yeah.
And upset some people. I got one of my sons, he's pretty much the opposite. he gets pretty off in the field sometimes. So anyway, that's how it goes.
Very good. Well, Paul, I want to thank you for sitting down to tell your story today, but more importantly, I want to thank you for your service to our country.
Well, I thank you, Brad. It's been a real pleasure to have you here. Thank you very much. Okay. All right, this picture, I didn't even know I had it. The girls just gave it to us here today, but that's a picture before I went in service, and that's a drugstore on the corner on Decatur, Illinois, just a block down from the theater. I don't know, maybe it was her birthday or something, but I didn't even know I had that picture. But that's Mom and I before I went in service.
Oh, great picture.
Okay, that's a picture of the Macon County, Decatur, Illinois Selective Service, the draftees that they sent to the induction center in Chicago on the Wabash Road, and that as early as I was telling you. They met the train, and then we went with the MPs to the induction center in the big hotel ballroom and so forth. So that was my group, but on the same train were groups like us from different counties that went on the same train to the induction center.
And that's you there
and
in the circle.
That's me marked over here.
Did you have any buddies that went with you that day, or was it anybody you knew, or was just
well, I knew some of the people, just from school and stuff.
Yeah. And then all of your travels through those years in the Navy, did you ever run into anybody from home?
Never did.
Never did? Okay.
Never did.
Yeah.
Okay, this is probably the picture of me when I got out of boot camp and went home for Liberty, and before I went back to and started my career at the Naval Hospital in San Diego.
Okay.
After I got out of boot camp at Farragut. Okay, Brad, this is a picture of after we got out of boot camp and got home back to leave. A local newspaper shot of us coming back home on leave before going back into duty. So.
And that's you on the end?
That's me on the end there, yeah.
Focus in on that real quick.
And I think it's dated there in the newspaper.
Yeah, December 19th, 1943.
Yeah. Okay, I think this is my certificate where I graduated from Hospital Corps School. And of course, may I take that there maybe? Let's see, this was...
February of 44.
Okay, yeah, then. And I was Hospital Apprentice second class. And that's the certificate for second class. Okay, this one here is a certificate for a certificate of special instruction, Hospital Corps, and that was for OR Tech, and it's dated October 1944 here. that was the graduation there. They give you a grade average to 3.2, and that was the Naval Hospital in San Diego, California.
Very good.
Okay, this is the first ship I was on. This is a brand new ship. The first crew aboard. This is the christening of the first ship, the first picture there. And it was a USS Burleson APA 67, and it was a troop transport ship. I think up here, I can't read the date up there, Brad. Maybe you can help me there.
That's November of 1944.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, thank you. And that the other.
And this is the officers?
Okay, and then that is, I think, the captain of the ship, christening the ship. All right, just see, this is the Blue Jackets Manual, 1940. And what this is there, you can probably get a shot there, possibly. The duties of the sentry, and there's where I was at Farragut, Idaho.
Wow.
And then as you get through this book, it tells you everything about the Navy, what you do, how you do it, and so forth. It's called the Blue Jackets Manual, 1940, and it's everything that you're supposed to know about the Navy. And as you can see here, it's pretty exclusive. All right, the next book here would be, this is the Operating Room Technology book, and this is the revised edition, and this is OR Tech information, and this is I was with the U.S. Fulton AS-11. I was operating room technician in the United States Navy Hospital Corps, and I purchased that book. This book for me to teach me OR Tech. It was purchased at the Mabel Smythe Memorial in Honolulu, Hawaii, April 1945 when I was on leave. So this is a book that teaches the OR technique and so forth, and kind of furthered my education about operating room technique. And this book here is referred to as the Merck Manual, 7th edition, and it's 1940, and I didn't know that was in there. And this is a book that is printed by the Merck Company, and it's Therapeutics and Material Medic, and it's made for doctors and nurses in not only the medical corps, but in the civilian doctors and so forth. And I purchased this book when I was on the Burleson APA 67, when I was at the first ship I was on. So this is a Merck Manual, and I carried this all through the service, and no matter what starts out alphabetical with, no matter what the condition might be, whatever the condition is, well, you try to relate to whoever you're treating to that if you don't have a doctor around. And the doctors use this in the military and in professional stuff. And this is the 7th edition, and this probably is one of very few books still left of that date and so forth. I've had other doctors and nurses I showed it to, and they can't believe that still book is still available around.
Well, what I find amazing, here's a book made for doctors, and here's a 19-year-old thumbing through it and
well, when you're in the
patients.
field, and you don't have doctors around, and you got somebody that's sick in a sick bay, where you just don't have, the next step professionals up, So you just do the best you can and look through here and try to diagnose what the word's wrong with that guy and try to help him, So that's how it goes. All right. This picture's probably taken after Okinawa. I see with my ribbons there and my rating there, that was probably taken after when I was on the subtender after Okinawa invasion.
Okay.
Okay, Brad, this is the Navy Hospital Corps, which during World War II, the Navy Hospital Corps always carried the Red Cross and the rating. And so later on, after World War II and the following years, I didn't know it even until one time I met a corpsman, and they call them hospitalists instead of corpsmen. And then this is the new rating. They use the caduceus instead of the Red Cross.
But that's after you were out.
Yeah, after I was out. So the new hospital corps people, that's how they operate with that kind of a rating.
Huh.
Okay, Brad, this is the front page of a ship newspaper, and it's on a submarine tender, and as you can see, it's dated August the 16th, 1945, and this was in Guam in the Mariana Islands. This is a newspaper that they print, actually, and it's about the Japanese surrender to Potsdam, Alabama, as rising sun sets, and it's on the U.S. Fulton AS-11 there, and they're there, and it's what war to rule the world. It ends in complete surrender of Japanese nation to fighting allies. And then the newspaper goes ahead and describes all of what happened and so forth. So it was like a newspaper aboard ship. So that was kind of how it is. Several pages there. Let's crew. We had about 1,000 people aboard, so kind of like a little city, you know.
Yeah, right.
This was your little city newspaper, so to speak, of what was going on at that time.
Wow. Paul, tell the story about this very special picture.
Okay, this special picture, Brad, is of my wife. She gave it to me before I went in service. I carried it all through boot camp and all through my time in overseas and through the invasion of Okinawa and so forth, and brought it home. So it went with me all the years that I was in service.
Wow.
And I might say again that we married 74 years and 5 months and a few days before she passed on December the 10th in 2017.
Oh, wow. What a great story.
Okay, Brad, I think this is a picture, a newspaper in, I think, San Diego or Los Angeles.
LA Times,
LA Times, and that was January, the 14th, 45. And they had a group of people that brought, this is aboard the ship, and Burleson, and they was bringing books and puzzles and so forth. So the ship veteran used them in the sick bay and so forth. That's me there, another corpsman and so forth, accepting the stuff there. This is a picture of me here playing in board ship. I always try to keep the patients entertained, so a lot of times you play checkers or something for games with them. So this is showing here. And okay, Brad, that's my discharge when I got out of service, and I was saying that we refer to discharge documents in DD 214, but the Navy didn't use a DD 214. They had a NASPERS number they used for it instead of the 214. Which is a separate paper from the discharge. And of course, on the back here's all the technical information of where you served and so forth. Okay, Brad, this is just swimming trunks that I had early on, because when you was in the islands, why, you had to go wade water in from the ship in a lot of times, or from the LVCP and wade in, so we all were just swimming trunks, and so I started marking them as I wore them. So we started out here with, what's that, I can't even read.
Russell
Islands, Guadalcanal, Tulagi, Savo, Ulithi, Okinawa, Guam, what's that?
Pearl Harbor.
Honolulu. And this is the ships I was on. USS Burleson, APA-67, US Fulton, AS-11, and United States Navy, and what's that last stuff there? Hospital Corps. So I wore those all through the wading into off the ship and wading into the into the islands that we was on.
And then from talking to the girls, it sounded like you used them to mow the lawn and
when I got home, I used to mow the lawn and just wear them at home. So I don't know. I guess we kept them through the years. So.
Oh, that's
so those
wonderful.
are pretty old. Those are getting pretty old too. When you talk about 1940, 44 probably or something.
Very good.
Brad, that's my paycheck. About 4 months after I started working, after I got back home. As you can see, the pay wasn't too good, but back then it wasn't. It was to get by money. But so thank goodness. Through the years, my paycheck increased.
What is it? 63 and a half
hours? I got
hours?
out in January, and that's in May of 40 January, about 4 months after I started working. That was one of my paychecks. You didn't get paid by the hour, you got paid by the week, and you worked until you got your job done.
Okay, Paul?
Okay, that's a picture of my 6 children. I was all home on our 50th anniversary. And if we can get going to July of this year, we'll be in our 76th anniversary. So that was 26 years ago.
I'll be darned.
And that's 4 boys and 2 girls. Some great children and just wonderful kids.
Wonderful.
All right, Brad, this is a picture of Mom and I toward the latter part of her life. I don't know the occasion or anything, but that was taken probably within the last about 2-3 years.
I'll be darned.